I'm a professor at Ferris State University, but I'm also a co-owner of a small hobby farm. And so we do play around a lot with plants and gardening and this, that, and the other. I do want to preface, though, that you do not have to own a small hobby farm to be able to do the things that we have done in here. We actually have done everything that's in this presentation on a small piece of property. Okay? So in case you want to do it. So as part of what this presentation is, it's not just all pharmacy. Yes. You've heard a lot of that in the past day. But it's also how to actually grow the plants. Okay? So with that, I'll get started. I don't have anything to disclose. I wish I did. Because eventually some of these pieces of equipment that you need good hand tools, you need reference books, and you need the plants themselves, do add up in cost. So I do wish I had something to disclose, but I don't. So by the end of this presentation, I hope that you'll get out of it whether or not recommending almonds, blueberries, strawberries, and garlic in someone's diet may actually help prevent the cardiovascular diseases such as lipids, blood pressure, and sugars. And at the end, if actually doing the gardening benefits you too. Because we always hear that you need to eat healthy, but is there really any data to support that? Okay, so we're going to go through that in this order. And this first picture here is a picture of our almond tree a couple years ago, but only a few years after planting. You can see the red leaves. This was taken in the fall. And you can also see the fence that's around it, which I'll get into. So almonds have a few mechanisms that have been proposed that lower cholesterol. One is decreasing the reabsorption of cholesterol and bile acid, increasing bile acid and cholesterol excretion, increasing LDL receptor activity, and also regulating cholesterol synthesis. So with that, it has been proposed that it will lower your cholesterol. There are two studies that I would like to go through. One is a meta-analysis that was published in 2009, and since then there was a crossover trial published in 2011. There were 5 trials in the meta-analysis, and the total number of people only equaled 142. So you will see that this is an issue with all of the studies. They're a very small number of patients. They're not the big randomized placebo-controlled trials that we like to see when we're actually recommending something. The meta-analysis were mixed with the fact that there are lipids either normal or high in there. This is also important when I go through all of the studies, because some of the studies, when they evaluated whether or not these foods were good for us, you could only see the effect if they actually had that disease and not necessarily if we were already healthy. So that's something to keep in mind. And also they included somewhere between 25 and 168 grams of almonds. In the 12-week crossover study, there was only 20 patients in there. All their meals were actually prepared for them, but when they were in the almond group themselves, 20% of the calories came out of those meals and was replaced with 20% calories of the almond group. So the calorie count amongst all the groups were the same. It just depended where they got it from. And in this case, the baseline total cholesterol was 220 and the LDL 135. So above normal if we want it for cardiovascular patients, but not too high. I mean, that's not terrible LDL. So this is your first question that you can answer on your green sheet if you want to be eligible for the prize at the end, but also for your card. So you can hold up your cards A, B, C, or D. How many almonds do you think you need to eat to get 25 grams? I see about 4 or 5 green, about 6 blue, and 2 yellow as of now. Okay? Okay? So the answer is red, your red card B. So you need to eat about 20 almonds to get the amount of almonds, the minimum amount of almonds that were included in the study. Everybody got a perfect score so far yet? A couple of you. Okay, so the results of the study is that both of the studies showed a decrease in total cholesterol and in LDL. The Lee study showed that was statistically significant in both of those groups, with a decrease of 19 in both, which you still saw the trend, though, in the meta-analysis. The almonds did not affect your HDL, nor did they affect your triglycerides in both of these studies. So So in conclusion, for the almonds and cholesterol, we do have mechanisms that have been proposed to lower our cholesterol. It seems that it lowers the LDL somewhere between 3 and 19% if you look at all the meta-analyses that were done. And it lowers total cholesterol by about 6%. So this one's not on there because this was more of a real question. So do almonds improve your entire lipid panel? No, right? So it doesn't do your HDL or your triglycerides. Okay, now do almonds lower blood pressure? No one is really sure how this might happen if it does lower the blood pressure, but they believe that it has to do with the magnesium and the potassium content that is in almonds itself. About 1 ounce of almonds equals somewhere between 5 and 6 milliequivalents of each one of these. And the first study was a 1-year open-label, no control study, looked at 50 patients and they evaluated blood pressure at the end. The intervention was actually just for patients to eat almonds, which is again about 20 almonds with 22.5 grams in there. But their diet was self-selected. So even though there was no control, which is kind of hard to figure out what the results mean, it was also more real life because these patients got to eat whatever they want, which sometimes we notice our patients do anyways. They were average age of 59 with a BMI of 27. They all had high lipids and a systolic blood pressure around 121 and a diastolic of 74. So again, not too high when we're looking at an endpoint of blood pressure. And what you can see at the end of this study was that there was a decrease in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure at the end when they incorporated almonds into the diet. The systolic fell by about 4 points and the diastolic by about 2. Even though this doesn't seem like a lot, there have actually been medications out there FDA approved for blood pressure reduction with only this small of a reduction, because it is statistically significant. So just kind of keep that in mind. Even though they're small numbers, our meds out there that we put people on for blood pressure do about the same effect. So in conclusion, when you look at almonds for blood pressure, it does seem that, again, about 20 almonds per day will reduce your blood pressure about equivalent to what one of our meds would do over about a year period of time. Almonds have also been looked at to lower sugars. Right now, they don't even have an idea of how this may happen. They've looked at insulin levels to see if the insulin levels were affected, either increased or decreased, and they can't find a correlation there. They've also looked at the glycagon-like peptide 1 concentrations, and that also has not changed. So I can't tell you a mechanism at this point in time as to how this may benefit our patients. But there were 2 studies that were both published in 2011 that looked at sugars and insulin when you ate almonds. The first one was just a one-time crossover, so they only did two samples in each of the patients. They were all fed fatty meals. There were only 20 in there, 28 grams of almonds, and their blood glucoses weren't too bad, 126 to 135. In the Lee study, this should look familiar to you because it's the same as the cholesterol study, is that there was a 12-week crossover period where they substituted out the calories of the almonds. So same author, same design, and in this case the baseline glucoses were 157. And these are the results of the study. The very first one is hard to interpret per se when you look at it as a whole because what they measured were the AUCs. So I fed you a high-fat meal, I kept looking at your sugars, they gave me the AUCs of the sugar content, and they showed that it was lower. What that means clinically, I don't know because the numbers aren't any numbers that we're used to interpreting, but it did appear that the glucoses overall were lower postprandial. In the Lee study, they actually looked at the preprandial levels, and so you can see here the control group was at 155, where the almond group was at 149. So again, they didn't bring this to goal that we would want, but the almonds in the diet did help. Okay? So what we can see from these two studies is that both preprandial and postprandial glucoses are lower in patients that have eaten almonds. Okay, so now more of the fun part. We got through the studies that makes this CE approvable, but now the fun stuff. So this is the next question on your sheet. How tall do almond trees get? Because if you're going to grow one, you got to know how big it gets. I have about 6 C's a D, 2 D's, 7, 8 C's, 8, 9 C's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, about 8 B's, so the C's and B's win in 1A. Okay, so again, don't cheat, put your answer down on your sheet first. I'll give you the answer, and it's C. Okay, if you read the book, so it says 18, but you know, you would be able to guess 18 if I put that in there. It's the only one that stood out. So around 18 to 20 feet is how big an almond tree gets. So keep that in mind if you want to grow one. Okay, so if you can imagine from that question I just asked you, one of the important things to do is select the right spot in your yard to put an almond tree if it's going to get 18 to 20 feet tall. I suggest if anybody has ever had this happen to them, don't put it underneath your power lines because consumers doesn't care. They will cut it down no matter what. Okay, so some of you are giggling, so I can tell you've had experience with consumers before. Okay. The other thing that I'm going to do is not only tell you how to grow these things, but I'm going to give you some references so that if you want to do this in the future, you know which books to buy. There are a ton of books that are out there that you can do, but these are some of the ones that we've used. So this one in the right-hand corner is Fruits and Berries for the Home Garden, and it includes what you would think it would include is all of the fruit and nut trees that you can possibly grow, and also all of the bush trees such as raspberries and blueberries are included. Now, I'm from Kalamazoo, so the hardiness zone that we live in Kalamazoo is a 5. So is there anybody from the middle of the state here? So where are you from? Where's Oh, so you're a little bit lower. So you're probably still zone 5. You're probably far enough south. So if I had anybody in here from, the Cadillac and the Grayling area and this, that, and the other, you're probably zone 4, which an almond tree probably is not going to like your winters as much. But as long as you're here along the coast or farther south within Michigan, that's about the farthest north an almond tree will survive a winter. So it's zone 5. So you do need to know what zone you live in before you go out and spend money on plants that aren't going to make it. Okay? This is a couple of the companies, and I'm, again, not being paid by any of them, that we have ordered things from. Miller is out of New York, and Gurney's is out of southern Indiana. And so both of those we have used for many of our plants. There are several others out there that are recommended in some of the books that you might look at that have decent reputations. We have not. The biggest thing I think that you want to make sure is that you have one that has a decent reputation that does not send you diseased plants. And that is one thing that we haven't received from either of these two, is plants that already have diseases on them. The almond tree that they sell is the Hall's Hardy Almond, which you can see an ad down here for. Again, grows around 20 feet tall. And if you're going to get a tree that's already 3 to 4 feet, so a little bit of a jump start, it's going to cost you about $30. When you put in a tree, there's a couple things that you need to keep in mind. Is first off, you need to put it in a nice big hole with good nutrients. Okay, so invest in the hole that you dig, or have somebody else dig. Okay, and put good things like manure, compost, peat, topsoil, and mix it in with the soil that you already have there. We have a, not so hard, but we do have a clay type soil, so we did have to really mix ours together. The other thing you can see here on the right hand side is that this tree, which is actually an apple tree, sorry I didn't put in my almond tree here, but they are supports. So you don't want this tree to try to survive, again, our storms that blow through here in Michigan, especially in the winter, and go out one morning and have it completely fallen over before the root system kicks in. And I think we removed the supports around 4 to 5 years into it so that they were actually able to stand. We ended up putting in another support this year because the fruit that we have on our trees is so heavy this year, especially after last year, that a couple of them received their supports back again. Animals are an issue. Okay? We do live in Michigan, we do have rabbits, and we do have deer. So the deer causes about 2 different things, well, maybe 3. One is that they love the new branches and the new leaves of your trees. And so until they grow tall enough so that way when they strip the bottom part of your tree, the tree can still live because they love those new branches. They also, by the way, like the peaches and the apples that are falling or not falling yet off the trees, they'll take them off themselves and eat your fruit. So you do need to make sure you go out there and get that beforehand. So the far right is actually also a rub. So anybody that knows bucks knows that they come by and they will rub your tree and they will cause permanent damage like this one on the right, and this tree happened to live. But if they actually rub all the way around and strip the bark all the way around, your tree will die. Okay? Same thing with bunnies. Bunnies like chewing on new bark. And they will also, what they call, ring your tree and eat all the bark off the bottom. And once they do that, your tree will also die. So the almond trees, where we happen to put them, we built a fence, a little fence around them. And we also wrap the bottom so the rabbits won't get to it. And keep in mind, if you live somewhere where the snow falls a lot, you need to make sure that you wrap taller than your snow. Because we had a friend once that wrapped their trees, the snow fell 2 feet up, and so the rabbits ate around where the top of the snow was. So even though they wrapped it, the snow was too tall. Okay, so learn from everybody else's mistakes. Because believe me, you'll make your own. We have. Okay. It's important to water your new trees and fertilize them. Usually the first, right when you put them in, because your dirt's so good, you can skip the first set of fertilizing. But after a time, your plants tend to utilize the nutrients that's in the dirt that you use. So I think at least for the first few years, you probably do need to put a little bit extra in there in fertilizer. And they sell both nut and fruit tree fertilizer specifically for it. For almond trees, it's important to water them deeply and less frequently compared to things like apple trees. Because almond trees, they have one main root that goes down instead of a bunch of branches that come out. So those need to be watered deeply. Pollination is important because once your plants bloom, you need to have them pollinated and maybe cross-pollinated, so that's something to keep in mind. The right-hand side is actually a honeybee on some buckwheat, and then a bumblebee is in the middle. It is important to have all kinds of bees in your property. They've noticed the bigger the mix of types of bees that you have, the better pollination you have. So you can go out and raise honeybees, which we have, but you also need all the other bees that can come in and pollinate, because honeybees have their own specific way of doing things where other bees do too. They expect you to be able to get almonds after 5 years. I can tell you our trees have been in for 5 years and we have not received almonds off of them yet. Had a couple setbacks. Anybody that's gardened last year knows we didn't get any rain. So that was a year of a setback. And we also had Japanese beetles eat all of our trees and the leaves off, so that set them back a year or two. So full-size trees, I think, takes more around the 6 to 7 year range rather than the 4 to 5, which a dwarf tree would take. You're expected to get somewhere between 12 and 15 pounds of nuts off of each tree. So I hope you like almonds if you do decide to do this, or have a lot of friends, so you can eat and enjoy those. So I've already mentioned that an almond tree is going to cost you $30, probably $100 for the hole that you put all the good dirt in, but $30 for the tree itself. You do have to wait a few years to get the almonds, but is this cost effective? So if you walk into Meijer and you buy a pound of almonds, how much is that going to cost you? You hold up your sign. I got a lot of B's, one D, a C, another D, a lot of B's on this one. Okay, so not as in honeybees, but the letter B. Yeah, so $6 is about what you would expect to pay. And this is just the plain almonds. Okay, this isn't the honey roasted ones that taste a lot better in this end there. Okay, good. All right, any questions on almonds? Questions on almonds. All right, we're going to go on to blueberries. This is one of our blueberry bushes. This is actually a dwarf blueberry. That is fenced in so our animals don't get to it. So there's a few mechanisms that have been proposed for eating blueberries and benefiting your cardiovascular health. One is the upregulation of endothelial nitric oxide synthase, decrease in carbohydrate digestive enzymes, decrease in oxidative stress, and they also believe that they have anti-inflammatory properties. So the first study is looking at blood pressure, and they looked at 66 patients over an 8-week period of time, and this is a randomized, single-blinded trial. The patients were considered obese with a BMI of 38. They had metabolic syndrome. The average age was around 50, and of course they excluded patients that were on medications that could affect your blood pressures, supplements such as fish oil and antioxidants. You couldn't smoke in this study, and if you had more than 2 drinks per week, we are in Travers, that you would be excluded from this. So anybody going on those wine tastings would drop out of the study. These patients were given freeze-dried blueberries at 50 grams per day, and that was divided up into twice a day, and it was at least 6 to 8 hours apart, and then they followed that with a cup of water. The placebo arm just got a cup of water. There were 25% dropouts in the study, which seems high, but it was the same in both groups, by the way. So both the blueberry and the placebo group, 25% dropped out. And it was very interesting. If you look at the reasons why they dropped out, they're the same reasons that we memorize for every single medication that we have out there. Right? Nausea, vomiting, constipation, and diarrhea, which I've never still figured out how we end up with both. The only one that's not listed here is headache, right? But the results of this study did show a statistically significant improvement in blood pressure. So the first sign is the blueberry. So you can see a decrease in blood pressure by 6% of the systolic and about 4% of the diastolic, where the placebo arm only had a 1 to 2% decrease in both. It is important to note that they did not see a change in body weight or waist circumference in this study. Because if you read some of the studies, patients' weights actually change when you start changing their diet. And so they believe that the benefits of cholesterol and glucose and blood pressures is due to the weight reduction and not necessarily due to the foods that they're eating. Okay, so in this case, since we didn't see that, they believe that the actual benefit is from the blueberries and not because patients lost weight. They also, in this study, didn't see a change in hemoglobin A1C, insulin, glucose, or any lipid issues. So if we're going to look at blueberries and blood pressure control, 50 grams of blueberries decrease blood pressure by about 5%. So does blueberries improve your blood pressure? Yes. The second study on blueberries looks at insulin sensitivity. These were 32 patients, 6 weeks, randomized and double-blind. It was set up quite similar to the other study, where they included obese patients at a BMI of 38. They had insulin resistance but not diabetes. Their average age, again, was around 50 to 55, and they couldn't be on any medications that affected glucose or insulin, have any thyroid issues, or have any alcohol intake. These patients actually got smoothies made for them, which is probably a lot better than the freeze-dried blueberries, at about 40 grams per day, also split up about at least 6 hours apart, which again was similar to the previous study. And the placebo arm actually, again, benefited more in this study because they got also smoothies that were placebo that had blueberry flavoring to them instead of just a glass of water. At the end of the study, they showed an improvement in insulin sensitivity. And the results were kind of interesting how they presented them. So the first set of bars shows how many patients actually improved their insulin. So over 60% of patients had a better insulin profile compared to those in the placebo. But what they also reported was the degree of improvement. So those patients that were on blueberries had a better degree of improvement in their insulin sensitivity compared to those not. Again, there was no change in body weight, lipid profile, or blood pressure. So, what's that?
Why didn't this study change?
That's a good question. Why did this one not? And maybe you need that extra 5 grams of blueberries, or you may need that extra time because it was 6 to 8 weeks, or a couple more people in the study. This one was a little bit smaller. So it's hard to say, and it is surprising that one study would show it and another one would not. So in obese patients, blueberries 45 grams per day divided up seems to improve your insulin profile. Okay, again, the fun part, growing blueberries. So again, in your questions, what pH do blueberries grow best? The first one's a B. B, B, B. C, C, B, C, B. I have a couple C's, one A, and about 8 or 9 B's. Okay, the answer is B, 5. Blueberries like acidic ground. So if you don't have acidic ground, you'll have to change that if you want to grow blueberries. 2 of the references that I have liked about growing blueberries, the one on the left you've already seen. It's the same one that we used for the almonds. The one on the right is actually a very small booklet put out by Story Country Wisdom, and it's a bulletins, and they put out bulletins for all kinds of things, and they've been around forever. So you can find bulletins about not only blueberries, but keeping your basement dry, how to use a chainsaw, how to plant all kinds of herbs, gardens, how to plant for bringing in butterflies and hummingbirds, etc., etc. So they're all nice little bulletins. They're all about the land. It has something to do with the land. And if you find one that you like, the cost isn't that bad. They're about $4. So for each one of those. So if you look at the amount of information in one of these bulletins compared to the cost that you pay for it, it's a pretty good deal. All right, it's always, again, important to pick the right location to put your blueberries in. They do like a lot of sun, and they also don't really like frost per se, so blueberries probably shouldn't be planted in the lowest part of your yard. So on a hill or on a slope, but not where the frost and the freezes are going to settle. Because if you get that late frost or freeze, which Michigan does get, they will kill your blossoms, and then you're out of blueberries for that season. Soil is very important. It needs to be rich, and we already talked about the pH. This is one of the references that we had used for one of our soil tests. MSU Extension is a very good reference for people that's free online to utilize to get information from. But in this case, they also offer soil testing. Sometimes your local hardware stores do this, and MSU's extensions that are local also do this, but it also depends on how much information they give you. If you dig up your soil and you send it into MSU and you pay your $20, they actually run several different things, probably at least a dozen different things that might be in your soil. So all the nutrients that are in there, the pH, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So that's an idea to do if you're really looking at planting a lot of things. You need to select the correct type of plant. Again, Zone 5 is where we are in Kalamazoo, but they do have blueberries that will sustain a winter up to Zone 3. So everybody should be able to plant blueberries. If you go out and you pick blueberries from a farm, typically you get a high bush plant, so they stand a little bit taller, but you can also buy low bush. Where to get these? It's pretty much anywhere. Some local nurseries, Home Depot, I think the first set of blueberries that we actually put in, we weren't as knowledgeable about the different types that there are, and we just went to Home Depot and bought a couple and put them in the ground. With good dirt, but we did. Or you can, again, order them in from different nurseries, such as Gurney's or Miller's. On the small piece of property we bought for the farm, We actually are putting in 12 different types of blueberries to see which ones grow best in the microclimate that we have at the farm and which ones will also taste the best. So just because it works 1 mile away doesn't mean it's going to work 5 miles away. This is just one page of one of the magazines that you can get that has the different blueberries in it. So there's 6, 7, 8 different blueberries that I have listed up here for you. Some come due a little bit earlier than others, but again, we put in 12 different types in one place. The one at the right I like mentioning because it is a dwarf top hat blueberry. This was actually designed at Michigan State University to be grown in containers. We have a couple of them. We actually put them in the ground. This was the first year for us that they produced a couple of blueberries, so they're not quite at maturity level yet. But you can, even if you just have a porch, put in a blueberry in a container and just bring it in when the weather gets too cold. So it's just kind of fun. Small bush. It's important, again, especially when you're first establishing your blueberries, to water them appropriately. One thing, again, that we talked about with the almonds, but also with the blueberries, is that you want to bring in the bees so that you have the appropriate pollination. Fertilization, I think, is important in making sure your pH turns out well. We, again, have learned by experiencing all this. We, again, put our blueberries in very good dirt, like you're supposed to at first, but about 3 to 4 years after that, they seem to eat up all the nutrients, and we didn't get very many blossoms or blueberries. And so we refertilized appropriately for that area, made sure the pH was right. And ever since we started doing that again, we've had plenty of blueberries. So that's important to keep in mind. Blueberries have a very, their roots don't go very deep. So they're more superficial, so it's important to water them a little bit more frequently and not as deeply, but also to mulch them. And you can mulch them with anything that you like. We have done both grass and straw and pine bark. So if you read the books, they recommend either pine needles or pine bark because pine is acidic. So if you have a choice, that is what they recommend, but you can use anything. It is important to also prune your blueberries. We haven't had them long enough to prune yet. I think this winter we probably will, though, because again, the amount of fruit that is on the blueberries, some of our branches are completely leaning over and hitting the ground. So we're going to have to look at the pruning with ours this year. Animals and birds are an issue. So the animals, again, that you'd have to worry about would be the bunnies, that they would come in and eat the bark off your blueberries and kill those. The birds don't seem to be as big of a problem as I've always heard about and read about. They seem to like the bugs that like your blueberries and your blueberry bushes rather than the blueberries themselves. So will they come eat some of them? Yes, they will. I've watched them eat blueberries, I've watched them eat some of our grapes and this, that, and the other. But they like the spiders that grow inside, in between the blueberries better than they do the blueberries because there's more nutrients in there when they eat protein. So don't just cover everything up until you see how they're doing. Yeah?
Comment, in Grand Haven there's a professional blueberry grower, Risingus, and they've had a lot of problems with the combination of MDOT and the Ottawa County Road Commission on 31. The salt that gets blown off.
Yes.
And they basically, as far as I can figure out what I've read in the paper, they've got nowhere with them. But I mean, the salt definitely gets everywhere, all
yes.
right? But that's a problem. So if you have that blow off, or however it gets over there, whether it's plowing and melting, or when it's dry, blowing over,
yes.
really do a number.
Yes, and actually that's his comment is that people have had a problem with your plants that you plant next to the road because of the salt that Michigan puts on our roads so that we are safe and drive safely. And the middle winter also does damage to your plants that live alongside the road. And they will tell you that not only for blueberries, but also for things like pine trees. So try not to plant, if they salt your road, they only put sand down where I am, so we haven't really had that big of a problem. But if you plant something too close, they will kill it for you. And they don't have a lot of empathy when it comes to if your plants die.
Yes.
Okay. Also, diseases can affect your blueberries. We have had one set of diseases that have come into our yard to affect our blueberries, and it was actually called mummification, hence the mummy that's up here. And what happened was right before the blueberries became ripe enough to eat, they shriveled up and died. So right at the very end, so it was a big teaser. And what happens is there's spores in there, and that's when they kill it. They drop to the ground, and then the next winter the spores live there for the winter. In the spring they come up and re-affect your blueberry plant. So luckily at the time we only had a few blueberry plants, so we were able to go out there and get rid of all of the blueberries that we had on our bushes, make sure there was nothing in the mulch that was on the ground, and we threw all of that out. So we were actually able to save our blueberry plants, but to completely destroy the harvest for that year. We found out about this disease from the Michigan State University Extension. So again, that extension is very good to utilize. OSU, hopefully nobody's too big of a Michigan fan, but OSU also has an extension, and also the other MSU, which is Missouri State University, has an extension. So in between all three of those, there's a lot of good information out there online that you can find. These are some of our blueberry plants. As you can see, the one on the left has great blueberries on it. The one on the right is actually the blueberries in the fall. It has very beautiful leaves that turn in the fall, so it can be ornamental and including nutritious if you plant that. And in the center is actually after all the leaves fall that the stems turn red. And you can see in that year we actually mulched it with grass. So they are very pretty bushes all year round, let alone give you some blueberries. So what are you going to do with all these blueberries if you plant a bunch of blueberry plants? So obviously eat them raw on your cereal and this, that, and the other, but you can also freeze them, you can can them, you can make them into preserves. So anybody that has done jellies, it's very fun to do with all of your blueberries. If you choose to can, these are a couple canning books that I recommend. The one on the left is the typical one where you can find anywhere, including Meijer. It is the Blue Book, put out by Ball, who makes all the canning supplies, or most of the canning supplies. There's two companies out there, really. It's not blue anymore, by the way, even though it's called the Blue Book. They have updated it. It's now yellow. The one on the right is also by Ball, and it's about 4 or 5 times thicker and has a bunch of other recipes in it that are a little bit more exotic type things, rather than just the basic jellies that you can find out of the first book. And the last one on the bottom, is by somebody named Jackie Clay. She actually writes articles for Backwood Homes, and she really lives off the land. And let me tell you, she has canned everything that you can imagine, and to see if it works or not, and has also made every mistake that you can possibly think of. And you can even write into her and say, look, this is what happened to us, why did this happen? And she will, again, put out an answer in Backwoods Home Magazine, which you can find online. So it's really good, again, to learn from those that have done it before you. Okay. All right, any questions on blueberries? Okay. We're going to go into strawberries. This is one of our strawberry plants, and there's one little blossom on there that was taken early this year. And as you can see, around it there's straw for the mulch. So it's really easy to figure out which mulch that you need for the strawberries. Grass will also work. So strawberries and their mechanism that's been proposed to help improve our cardiovascular health include upregulation of endothelial nitric oxide synthase. If you remember, this was the first one that was also listed for blueberries. So it seems that both of them have nitric oxide benefits. It also has an inhibition of glucose uptake and transport, inhibition of carbohydrate and lipid digestive enzymes, and also inhibition of angiotensin I converting enzyme. The first study is we're going to look at hypertension. And what they did here was a population-based study, and they combined 3 major studies together. And the NHS is the Nurses' Health Study, and the HPFS is the Health Professional Follow-Up Study. And so they followed these patients for 14 years to figure out if they developed hypertension or not. In the second two studies, the average age was around 55. The first study, the NH2 study, they specifically tried to target patients a little bit younger. Their BMIs were around 25. Most of them did have a family history of cardiovascular disease. And this anthocyanins, this is what they believe is the active component in things like blueberries and strawberries that have the benefit for hypertension. The results of the study showed that if you did intake this anthocyan, you had about an 8% reduction in your risk of hypertension. Okay? Again, this is a population-based study, so it was hard to tease out whether it was blueberries or strawberries, which are the two bigger fruits that the patients said they ate in this study, compared to just strawberries. The relative risk was statistically significant. For some reason, and I don't know why they picked this patient population, but they did a subgroup analysis that looked at patients less than 60 years of age and evaluated whether or not they ate strawberries once a week, whether it benefited their blood pressure. What they found out was that there was a reduction, but it was not statistically significant. So the results that I take from this is that strawberries, if you only eat them once a week, which does not seem like a lot if you look at our other studies, they were eating them every day. If you're under the age of 60, it is not enough to significantly affect your blood pressure. Okay? But if you eat strawberries and blueberries, you will decrease your risk of hypertension by 8%. Okay, so alone, eating strawberries alone from this study, does it decrease your blood pressure? No, it seems like there's a trend, but just one serving per week is not enough. Okay, the second study we're going to look at is insulin and glucose levels. There were only 26 patients in this study. It is a single center study, but it was crossed over. And they looked at patients that were around the age of 50 with a BMI of around 30. You couldn't be on any medications that affected glucose or insulin. You could not be allergic to strawberries. You weren't allowed to have diabetes, and your blood pressure, if you had hypertension, it had to be controlled. What they did in this study was they made their meals for you. So you came in the morning, they fed you breakfast, which included things like bagels and cream cheese, ham, bacon, eggs, and you got to eat this. And if you were in the control group, you didn't get any strawberries. But if you were in the active group, you got strawberries from California. And you got about 100 grams of strawberries. So if I were going to have you eat 100 grams of strawberries to match this study, how many strawberries would you have to eat? So this is also on your green sheet. Oh, hopefully the answer is not 20 since I only have A, B, C, and D. So hopefully that's probably not it. I have a handful, about 5 B's. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. About a dozen C's and another handful of D's. So it's actually B. It's only about 5 nice strawberries will equal 100 grams. I'm a sucker for chocolate-covered strawberries. So I did add a little bit of weight to them. Okay.
Must be from Florida.
Oh yeah, maybe from Florida. Maybe the California strawberries don't weigh as much. So at the end of the study, the patients actually had a normal glucose going into the study. Remember, they couldn't have diabetes. And so their baseline glucose to begin with was 99. So that's normal. And so what they found out is after you eat this meal, there was no change, whether you had strawberries or didn't have strawberries. But what they noticed is you did not have to have as much insulin to maintain a more normal glucose level. So it seems that it's doing something in those that are healthy, but you can't really reduce the sugars a lot when you don't have high sugars to begin with. Okay? So it doesn't seem that there's a change in postprandial glucose, but it is a decrease in the amount of insulin you need to keep the sugars at a more normal range. All right, the second is looking, our third study for strawberries is looking at cholesterol. Again, only 26 people. These are still California strawberries, by the way, not Florida. It is, again, a single-centered, randomized, placebo-controlled study, 12-week crossover. These patients all had hyperlipidemia, and their lipids, even though they had hyperlipidemia, their total cholesterol and their triglycerides could not be above 300, and their LDL was not above about 190. Their BMIs are around 30, and they couldn't be on any medications that affected the outcomes. They couldn't have diabetes or hypertension. These patients got to drink a strawberry beverage every day during their 6 weeks, and they were also, at the end of this, fed a high-fat meal, and they got 110 grams of strawberries. And at the end of this study, you'll see a little bit of a difference. These are all statistically different, but the total cholesterol, when you looked at baseline versus strawberry intake with a high-fat meal, did not change much. But if you weren't eating strawberries with that meal, your total cholesterol went up by about 12 points. Your LDL went up about 7 points, and your triglycerides went up about 18 points. So it seems that you're not having these acute changes after high-fat meals if you are on strawberries. So it seems to be tempering that a little bit. So 110 strawberries for 6 weeks every day seems to reduce your total cholesterol, LDL, and triglycerides after a high-fat meal. Okay. Growing strawberries. Your next question. What pH do strawberries grow best? 2, 4, 6, or 8? I have about 3 Ds, about a dozen Cs, 1 B. Okay? The answer is C. So you're looking about, and you're not far off. I don't think it'll go probably to an 8, but you can grow them at about 6.5 or 7 too, and they'll be okay with that. So not quite as acidic as our blueberries. They tolerate something a little bit more neutral, but they still like it on the acidic side. You've already seen these books before, especially the Fruits and Berries of the Home Garden. Again, a good reference for about anything that you're going to grow. And also the Story Country Wisdom Bulletin does put out one on strawberries. All right, your next question. If I want to grow strawberries, out of everything in my yard, am I going to see this fruit first in the season, second in the season, or last in the season? When am I going to see these? Okay, I got mainly A's, which is first, and that's correct. So that's kind of important when it comes to which strawberries we decided to grow. So when you're going to do strawberries, there's several different kinds out there, but one of the big things to differentiate what you choose to grow is, do you want ever-bearing or June-bearing strawberries? We chose to put in June-bearing strawberries for a couple reasons. One is, again, the first one to come due. So we like the fact that the fruits, after a nice winter in Michigan, we like our first fruits. We like the fact that we get a lot at one time, so that way if we want to make things like jelly, there's enough there. Because if you do ever-bearing that come throughout the year, you get a couple here and there, and you just kind of randomly go and pick your berries. Third is that we have other things in our yard that is growing, so it's nice to eat all the strawberries, get them out of the way, which might sound like a bad thing, but now I can forget about my strawberry patch. Because right now, this year, our peach tree is producing a lot of peaches, and we can't eat enough peaches to keep up with how many peaches there are. So if I also had to go out and eat strawberries, because I don't want to waste any of this food, it's just overwhelming. So you got to kind of figure out how you're going to plant and what you're going to do for doing this smart so that you still enjoy it at the end of the day. So we like having our strawberries, we like preserving them, and we like getting them done. They're out of the way. I've gone out there to weed them a few times, but otherwise I haven't had to worry about those for the rest of the year. Where to obtain them? Again, just about anywhere. I've seen them at Home Depot. We've ordered them in. They're at the local nursery, etc., etc. Where to plant them? They like sunny locations, and they also don't like that little divot in your yard where frost can settle. So try to avoid that area. They like a nice sunny slope. If you can go out there and design your own yard, a nice slope to the south is the best thing to do, but you can't really change your yard too much to have that actually happen. Soil, they like a lot of rich soil. Some of the people that we've talked to grow the best strawberries after they've moved their chicken coop. We're working on that. I don't know. Also, pH we've already talked about. Mulch, again, mulching with straw is the best thing simply because it keeps the weeds down and it lets the plants breathe so that you don't have things like fungus and molds growing on your plants. And then fertilize. These are our strawberries from this year. Yeah. They're not very, maybe these you would need more strawberries to reach the 100 grams because they're not quite that big. But. And then what are you going to do with them? Yes, I did put a picture of chocolate-covered strawberries on here. I did not do that with any of ours, but I am a sucker for them. So I'm glad the store downtown Traverse City was closed so that I couldn't see if they had chocolate-covered strawberries. But they did have all the caramel-covered apples in the window. Again, you can preserve them. You can make the smoothies or the shakes out of them. You can obviously eat them on your pancakes or just put them in the freezer. Okay, any questions at all about strawberries? Yes, ma'am.
There are strawberry fields in Little Known where I live.
Okay.
And it looks like they pulled the plants after they bloom, and now they were watering new plants this morning. What is that cycle?
Yes, that's a good question. So there's a couple of ways to get the most out of your strawberries that you possibly can. One is the very first year that you put them in, you can pick off the blooms, and it's supposed to help the plant really grow. And then when they bloom next year, you get the strawberries off of there and there's more blooms on them. But also what happens is your strawberries put out little shoots. And so that original plant will end up not producing strawberries very well, but it's actually the shoot. And so they were probably pulling out those old strawberries and using the shoot that it put off. And they say that you get about 3 good years maybe out of one strawberry plant, but your shoots then obviously add another year and another year each time you do those.
So they would be watering the shoots now.
Correct. Yeah, sometimes some of my strawberries are all over. I find them out in the yard now, so the shoots kind of keep going. I haven't pulled them up. Every once in a while we cut them down, but... Any other questions about your strawberries? Okay, this is garlic. Hopefully everybody likes garlic. I can tell you this is our garlic in the fall that is lightly mulched. I will give you a clue to one of the questions that will come up with. This is wrong. Just so you know, this is wrong. So don't answer the question based on this picture. You learn things when you go through it. All right, so first question is, how many cloves are in a head of garlic on average? I have about 12 A's, 6 B's, 2 C's. Okay, the B's get it. There's about 10 cloves of garlic in a head. So there's a couple mechanisms that have been proposed for lowering blood pressure when you eat garlic, and one is the production of hydrogen sulfide. Does anybody know what that is? I didn't either. We actually make this ourselves within our vessels that causes our vessels to relax. So this is a naturally occurring product within us, but they add a lot more when you eat garlic. It seems that it also inhibits angiotensin II and is a direct vasodilator. There are 3 meta-analyses that have been published based on blood pressure and the eating of garlic. The Reed and Reinhardt studies are very similar. They went through about 2007, 2008. They looked at all studies written in English and German. They had to be placebo-controlled, and they all used garlic supplements. For the Simmons trial, they opened them up a little bit more, a longer period of time. They included any languages. They weren't limited to placebo-controlled, and they also didn't limit it to what kind of garlic patients could eat. So they could have garlic oils, garlic vinegars, garlic supplements, garlic, all kinds of things, and all kinds of dosages. The Reed and Reinhardt looked at a 10 and 11 studies. The garlic powder and the brand name is up there for you, and they did dosages between 600 and 900 milligrams per day. The Simmons study found 32 studies to evaluate garlic and blood pressure. Because the Simmons study was not as stringent about what they let in, they could not find any conclusion associated with the outcome that they were looking for. So it was too broad. Where the Reed and the Reinhardt study actually found some differences. All the patients in those studies that they looked at had systolic blood pressure greater than 140, and they also showed a decrease in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure. Both of these were statistically significant, with a little bit higher of an impact in the Reinhardt study compared to the Reed. But if you look at these numbers, these are decent numbers when it talks about lowering blood pressure. So if you have the garlic supplementation somewhere between 600 and 900 milligrams per day, you can decrease your systolic and your diastolic blood pressure. So does garlic improve your blood pressure? So you can have your blueberries and your garlic, and you'll be good. There are a couple mechanisms that have been proposed for lowering your cholesterol. One is the decrease in cholesterol absorption, inhibitions of enzymes that synthesize garlic, and also deactivation of your HMG-CoA reductase. There are two studies that evaluate garlic and their effects on cholesterol. The first one is a meta-analysis in 2009, and the second one is a nice randomized placebo-controlled study that was published a year later. In the meta-analysis, there were 13 studies. They all included garlic doses and preparations, mainly the supplements that we saw in the previous studies, but it was a little bit more open. And they didn't see any results that we wanted to see at the end of the study, such as no change in your total cholesterol, HDL, LDL, or triglycerides. In the Sobin study, they actually did, a randomized placebo-control, garlic twice a day for 12 months, and they showed a total cholesterol decrease by 12% and an LDL by 16%. Again, if you look at statins in general, they decrease at around 30%, so not as big of an impact as our HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors, but not a bad decrease. There was no difference in HDL or triglycerides. And all the patients in this particular study did have high cholesterol. Their LDLs were about 180 before the study began. So cholesterol and garlic, I think the results are mixed right now, but the meta-analysis did include a lot of things that were not controlled. So that might have some influence. But the randomized placebo-controlled study did show some benefit of eating garlic. The last study for garlic is looking at lowering glucose. And they think it has to do with how insulin is handled and processed in the body. The study included 60 patients over a 24-week period of time, and they looked at patients that were newly diagnosed with diabetes. So if you look at their inclusion criteria, the fasting glucoses were between 100 and 130. So not that significant per se. They actually wanted to see if adding garlic to one of our medications, in this case metformin, helped improve the sugar profile. So all the patients received metformin twice a day, and the control arm, or the active arm showed garlic 300 TID. These patients were around 40 years of age, so a younger population, a weight of around 60 to 70. They didn't have any other comorbid conditions, and again, their baselines were 112 to 128. The results of this study, I think, are a little difficult to compare and interpret. So the blue arm is the placebo arm. And if you look at this, these patients had a baseline sugar of around 112, 113. At the end of the study, it dropped down to 110. So there was a decrease when they were put on metformin. And the red bars is actually the ones that got garlic in addition to it, where their baselines were around 127, 128, and actually decreased to 124. This decrease from 128 to 124 was statistically significant. So the authors concluded that adding garlic to patients with higher sugars actually benefited those patients when you're also adding it to metformin. I think that's hard to compare considering the baseline characteristics between the two arms are so different. So I would like to have seen that at baseline, both groups were the same to see if the garlic added to the metformin really did do something. So to me that's hard to interpret, but the author said that garlic can help lower your fasting blood sugars. They also showed in this study that it improved your hemoglobin A1C and improved your cholesterol. So growing garlic. So here's the first question in the garlic section. How do you get rid of garlic breath? Oh, wow. Everybody said C. Wow. Well, 1A. Wow. That's great. Has anybody tried this before? Eating parsley? Did you like it? I didn't either. I tried. So of course I'm doing this presentation, so of course I have to go out and get garlic and then eat parsley to see if it works. Because number one, it works, but then it takes away the garlic taste. So I like garlic, and so now I'm left with this funny taste in my mouth from this parsley, and it kind of just ruined the whole dinner. So I would personally rather smell like garlic, but if you want to get rid of your garlic breath, you can eat parsley.
Does it only work right after dinner?
That's a good question. I don't know. That's when I did it was right after dinner, and I didn't see if, at 12 o'clock at midnight it still was going to kick. Because I did have garlic last night, and I didn't eat the parsley, and they didn't give me parsley this time. But if you ever wondered why they give you parsley as a nice side on your fine dishes when you go out to eat, it's because of that. So if you want to get rid of your garlic breath, you can. It's not just to look nice. So, but I don't know. I don't know if it works 3 or 4 hours later. I didn't try that. Maybe I will. Okay, there are 2 country wisdom bulletins that you can look at. As you know, one says onions. I think the onion one did a better job on actually how to grow the garlic, where the garlic one did a better job on how to either use it or store it. Because the onion one actually included everything that you can grow below ground, such as leeks and onions and garlic. So there were more things in it. You can buy garlic through one of these catalogs. The garlic heads are somewhere, in this case, between $5 and $10 a bulb. I have had a friend that has ordered one of these in, and he has been able to produce his garlic every year, enough of it to replant again and use and also again have enough to cook with. I personally have not had any good luck with ordering in these expensive bulbs. If you read the books say that you should, because sometimes when you buy things at the store, they have already modified the different seeds and the different products so that you do not actually get a harvest if you replant things. I have had better luck going to Meijer's in the fall when the bulbs are 3 for $1 and planting Meijer bulbs. My heads probably aren't as big as the Meijer ones are, but they've actually grown. And so, again, after doing this, I decided to try it again, and I bought a $5 bulb. None of it came up. So there's 2 different stories about whether to buy this or not buy it, but I think after twice paying $5 for a head of garlic, I don't think I'll do it again. So how much mulch do you need to get your garlic through the winter? Because you do plant them in the fall. I know we haven't got to that yet. I have about 5 C's, a D, 6 A's, and 2 B's. Okay? The answer is C, at least for Kalamazoo, for your zone 5. Again, if any of you are from Grayling, I would recommend 4 inches but no one said they were from Grayling, so that doesn't, I can't type 2 answers. So the answer is C, so you said you're from more around the zone 5. But I also warned you that the very first picture was wrong. So I only had about a 1/4 inch of straw on those garlic plants to get them through the winter. They did make it. It was a mild winter. But if we have one of our bad winters, you really need about 2 inches of mulch on top of your garlic after they come up. So garlic doesn't seem to be as picky. They say just some good soil and they'll grow just fine. We do plant in the fall this Gardening Michigan book you can find at almost any bookstore that I've ever walked into. They tell you when to plant different things in the state of Michigan because it goes along with our seasons. So the best time to plant garlic is about September-ish. I have put it in as late as October. Some people plant to the moon. So, what's that? I do. We did not do our indoor planting, the seeds beforehand by the moon this year, and they turned out okay. But I can tell you that before I knew about this, I planted garlic twice in the garden, and the ones when we planted it when the moon was decreasing, which is, by the way, today, they turned out better. So the following fall, we dug them up, and the ones that we planted when the moon was at this phase turned out so much better than the other ones. And there's, of course, a million different factors that could have gone into this, but there are people that swear by planting to the moon. So any underground crops you plant when the moon's decreasing, above ground crops you plant when they're increasing. There's books on this, so some people believe it. Again, mulch for the winter. One of the things that we learned too is when to harvest your garlic so that it stores the best. You want to harvest the garlic when the outside leaves have browned, but the center stem is still green. Because if you let the whole thing die out, there's probably too much moisture and they really don't preserve well through the winter for you. And also storage. So this is the garlic. As you can see, the heads probably don't look as nice and pretty as the ones you go get at Meijer. But these are ones that were planted from the garlic that you can get at Meijer. And as you can see, there's a braid down the right-hand side, so that's how we decided we're going to store them this year. And this was the first time I've ever braided them. So I don't think it looks too bad for my first go-around.
Is that from one row?
Probably 2.
Okay.
When we do ours, we do 2 rows in above-ground boxes. And we used to do 1 row, but the winds and stuff used to knock it over. So we like the stability from 2 rows. All right, next one. How do you get the smell of garlic off your fingers? I have about 5 D's, 2 C's, 3 A's, and 5 B's. So rub them with table salt, and then you can wash it off with cool water. So that's how you can get the garlic smell off your fingers. Okay, any questions on garlic? Yes, ma'am.
A friend of mine told me that people that eat a lot of garlic keep mosquitoes away. Have you heard of that?
I have. And vampires. And yes, and MRSA actually. So and H. pylori. There's all kinds of things garlic does. So I'm working on an whole nother talk on the infectious disease parts of garlic and how much it gets away. So I don't know if anybody will just a little side thing. Has anybody ever got fresh garlic in a cut?
Ow.
Yes. So apparently you have. So let me tell you, it kills.
Like it
Yes. So it does kill everything. So you can put fresh garlic in one of your cuts and you won't get any MRSA. So you had a question back there?
The question is just about zone 3. Don't require mulching. The plants themselves become the real problem is getting rid of them.
But the garlic?
Garlic, you plant it in a garden that's got flowers in it, then you have garlic, you'll have much more flowers.
Yeah, that's a very good observation. They do have there's a couple books out there. One is Tomatoes Love basil. I know it's basil, but I don't think that's the title of the book. But there's a companion planting out there, and I haven't seen that garlic interferes with flowers, but it does interfere with beans. So if you're really going to do this scientifically, again, Michigan State Extension has one out there, but it says which things to plant with what, and which things not to. So again, there's companion planting and things to avoid. So don't plant your garlic with your beans, but we have planted garlic around our sweet potatoes to keep the pests out of them. But that's interesting. I haven't tried to plant them near any flowers yet. So you want your garlic to go away. Okay. So if you want free garlic, you're going to see him. Okay, gardening. So how does gardening benefit us at all? So there was a survey in Finland that looked at over 17,000 patients, and they looked at the type of activities they did. So they did light, moderate, and heavy. And so gardening itself, at about 4 hours or more per week of light gardening, consisted of what went in the category of moderate activity. And the end point of this study was to see if patients started blood pressure medicines or not. So they followed them for 11 years, and what they found out was 1,600 patients actually were started on blood pressure medications at the end of this. There was actually a benefit in both men and women, men a little bit more significantly than women, with a hazard ratio of 0.6. So about a 40% decrease of men that went out there and gardened actually decreased the risk of getting started on a blood pressure medicine. Women were about 0.8, and they had to do statistics to look at confounding variables such as weight and diet and this, that, and the other. But once they did that, we were also statistically significant that our gardening benefited us. Again, this was considered light, so maybe men did a little bit heavier or more gardening at that time compared to women. So the results of this study, obviously, is to put gardening into your life. So does gardening reduce your risk of hypertension? Yeah, or at least the fact that somebody started you on a blood pressure medicine, right? They had to find you first. Okay, the second study was a poster presentation. They looked at 111 patients, and their questionnaire was a little bit different. It actually looked to see if patients enjoyed gardening versus those that did not enjoy gardening. So it didn't really narrow it down per se. Again, it was only an abstract form as how much gardening you did or did not do. The follow-up was 930 days, and at the end point, they looked at things like Doppler flow and MACE. And MACE was not defined on the poster, nor is it defined very well in the literature. So depending on how they defined it, it could have included things like death from cardiovascular disease, catheterization, stroke, MI, non-Q wave MI. Those types of things is what went into the definition of MACE. I don't know which ones they actually included in here. The results of this showed that if they looked at Doppler flow, the flow through your vessels was actually better if you went out and enjoyed gardening. In the MACE group, they also showed that those numbers improved. So your cardiovascular endpoints were better if you went out and gardened and enjoyed it. And enjoying gardening was actually the only independent risk factor for the MACE outcome. So everything else they looked at didn't affect the MACE outcome, which I don't know what those were. Again, it was only an abstract form, but going out and gardening and enjoy it was beneficial. So there's a couple things when it comes down to gardening. We talked about all the plants and everything, and we talked about some of the references. These are a couple other references that we have used, and there's many more, like I said, out there. Our bookshelves are full of this, but one is Country Wisdom and Know-How. This has been around for a long period of time, and if I remember correctly, it came out when there was a big push during World War II to get people out there to do their own gardening. It really has a lot of information about living off the land. So it includes not only gardening stuff, but also how to build a fence, etc., etc. It's kind of the same as the Story Country Wisdom Bulletins. That book was such a good success, and they were making a lot of money off of it, they actually came out with the Garden Wisdom and Know-How book. So this includes more information about gardening itself. And again, I've seen these books on Amazon. Barnes & Noble has them. They're actually bigger books. They're about this tall, and they're softback. The other one that we think is fun is the Old Farmer's Almanac, and this is actually the original one. There's actually three other varieties out there of them, but this is the particular one we like. Again, is the original. Yes? Did you have a question? Okay. And I use this one somewhat for the entertainment. The stories that are in there are really good and fun, but it also will tell you when in your region to plant everything. So if you want to plant to the moon, you want to plant to the month, you want to plant to all those things, all of that is spelled out in there for you. So even if you're only going to use the couple pages all the time, quite frankly, if you're in Zone 5, just so you know, if you want to put in radishes, today is the last day to put in radishes for a fall harvest. And so that's in the book. It will also tell you the best days to go hunting, when to get a haircut, etc., etc. So again, there's a lot of fun things in the book. This particular year actually has the health benefits of receiving a kiss or giving a kiss. So again, a lot of fun things. Get the right equipment. We have purchased things at the dollar store, and let me tell you, those shovels don't last in any kind of real dirt. They will bend and break on you. So I know I said that almond tree is only $30, but you do need more of a $1 shovel to dig the hole for the almond tree. So please, if you're going to do this, go ahead and invest a little bit. You don't need to invest a lot. I've seen shovels all the way up into the hundreds of dollars. Ours don't cost that. But invest in something that's going to be somewhat reliable. And if anybody wants some leftover $1 shovels, we have a few. We've tried them. Square foot gardening and container gardening is something, again, that you can do. Again, most of this stuff, except for where the almond tree is, all the other plantings we've done, we kind of calculated out as about on the 16th of an acre. So you don't need a lot of land to do all this. So please don't think you have to go out and buy 20 acres to be able to do this. They do have books out there on how to live, I believe, on a quarter acre, an acre, 5 acres, and 10 acres. And so you can do a lot of this on an acre or less. Some people do square foot gardening. There is a very good book out there on square foot gardening. We did choose to start this way and do that. It's in raised beds. They're in a lot of them are 4x4. You don't really want them longer across than 4 feet. Really 2 feet is probably better, depending on your reach, because you want to reach the other side. So we can walk all the way around our 4x4. And they tell you how to exactly plant so that you get the best harvest out of that small piece of property. And again, container gardening. There's several books out there. Again, the dwarf top hat blueberry, you can put in containers, garden that way, bring it in the winter. Resources. They have master gardeners. You can get a master gardener certificate, and part of that program is you have to do volunteer work. So I know in Kalamazoo they have a 1-800 number that you can call the master gardeners, leave a message, and that's part of their volunteer work, is to get back to you with those answers. Okay, so I'm sure there's probably other programs around that can do that. You can also show up at local nurseries, because one of the places that they do their volunteer work is in the spring when you're trying to buy the plants that you think might actually survive in your yard versus not. Because some nurseries, they just want to sell the plants, and you know, if they survive or not, that's, again, the empathy goes down. MSU Extension Services, I've mentioned this before. Again, Missouri has one, Ohio State also has one. Again, very good information associated with these websites. And the last thing I put on here was make a friend. I gave you some examples of things that we have done wrong and have learned from them and have corrected them. But I think one of the best things that we've benefited from is others that have been out there and have done the same thing that we're trying to do. So we're not going to make the mistakes they made. Because believe me, even though this is fun, you will make your own set of mistakes. I can't tell you how many, I don't think I've lost any trees yet, how many branches or plants that have mysteriously disappeared when the weed eater came out. So you're going to lose plants here and there, how many caterpillars have eaten our tomato plants, et cetera, et cetera. So you're going to have enough stuff that's going to go wrong that if you talk to people that have done this before you, hopefully you can avoid those mistakes.